Welcome to the Dog Training Audio Experience Podcast. I'm your host, Erika Gonzalez. I'm a certified dog trainer and behavior consultant. And before we jump into today's episode, I want to give a huge shout out to our podcast sponsors over at Pupford. As a professional trainer, you know I'm using and recommending a lot of training treats. And some of our absolute favorites are the freeze-dried training treats from Pupford. Not only are they high quality, but they're also high in value, limited ingredient, and my dogs absolutely love them. And if you put them on auto ship, you'll actually get 15% off. So with that, let's get into the podcast. We're going to be debunking some myths today. And there's a lot of dog myths out there, especially on the old interwebs. So we're going to be debunking 3 today because I think we can go on for hours debunking dog myth content. And perhaps there might be a part 2 in store. Who knows? But to join me to debunk some of these myths and clear the air is my friend Don Hutton. He is a Karen Pryor Academy certified dog trainer and the owner of Running Dogs Training and Behavior located in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Welcome to the podcast, my friend. Don, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. This is exciting. I have my coffee. We're going to keep this super cash and super helpful for those listening. Oh, yes, coffee. We need that. We need that, right? I feel like we need that, especially you having a puppy around lately. So I know that's needed. Oh, there she is, little cameo. Love it. Love it. So let's just jump right into this. Myth number 1. So we're going to do 3, like I mentioned. Myth number 1. I hear this a lot. I know you do. And we hear, hey, if you pet your dog or show any affection when they're scared or nervous or running to you for some emotional support, if you will, if you pay attention to them or give them that attention, you will reinforce their fear. So this, to me, to kind of give an analogy to those listening, is the equivalent of kind of saying if your child comes running up to you for help, they just had a nightmare and want to come and get some reassurance from you, that if you were to engage them and care about it, we'd be reinforcing their fear, or they'd be more likely to feel fearful in the future or things of that nature. This logic doesn't make any sense to me. You can't really reinforce an emotion, is my opinion. But what are your thoughts on that? Where do you think this argument stems from? Where do you think this came from? Why do you think people think like this?
Yeah, I think I think it has, and I need to look into this, but I think it does have some roots in common sense parenting advice of prior times. I feel like oftentimes the general ways we think about a lot of stuff with dogs is just kind of lagging the trends in parenting advice. And I think, there has been advice in the past for people with their human children to,
yes.
to ignore some of the stuff, let them work it out, teach them to self-soothe, et cetera, et cetera. And it's packaged up in a pretty great sounding, seductive sort of way. You're like, oh, that probably is in the best interest of my child. I should probably do this. And so I think it's rooted in that. So that's kind of very prolific and in the general consciousness, or if you will.
Yeah.
But I also, it's really, it's so pervasive in the dog training community as well. And it's so unfortunate because I think the advice, while even well-intentioned, is just so misinformed and harmful.
Yeah, I think so too, because, I feel like it's kind of like let the baby cry it out thing.
Sure.
I think what you were just kind of implying there too, that's a thing. And
yeah.
I'm always like, I don't think I could ever do that, because if Jade or Freddie even remotely feels uncomfortable, I'm like, oh, baby, I really run to them. And I feel like, as humans, even when I need support a lot, when I'm having a day or, my husband's very gracious about that. And if I need help, friends, family, we all are helping each other. And who else are our dogs going to go to?
Absolutely. Especially in these times, especially in the midst of a pandemic. I mean, we're all stressed and I think, hopefully we've all been looking out for our friends and family who have been, maybe dealing with actual health things, but
yeah,
in broad strokes, just dealing with a really emotionally challenging time. And I think this idea all of a sudden looks so absurd in that sort of context where you're no, don't hug your friend. hug's maybe not a good example of these things, but
I know that's
don't
not aging well anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Don't be there for that phone call. Don't tell them everything's going to be okay, because you're going to be encouraging them to be more like insecure about this whole situation, where really you're just reassuring them. And I think reassurance is essential to like navigating really difficult times. And I think it makes the exact same sense when we talk about dogs that need some reassurance. I think by reassuring them and helping them to feel better, they'll actually be better prepared in the future to handle situations that are a bit distressing.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel that if they feel that there's support and that it is okay, and someone's kind of letting them know, hey, this is all right, no need to panic at that level, it might help them. And I do think, you know, even if it doesn't cure their anxiety over hearing a thunderstorm or whatever, I know a lot of us have that problem, and we've helped a lot of clients with that. You know, it's still, why not make them feel a little bit better by having somebody nearby that cares about how they feel? And oddly enough, we expect our dogs to be there for us when we're not feeling so hot. So why all of a sudden are we giving a cold shoulder? Is this notion we have to kind of give a cold shoulder or tough love when they're upset? Do you feel like, in your professional opinion, that kind of wild card question that just came up now, do you feel that there's damage that can be done, further damage, if someone were to take that kind of myth advice and say, oh, I shouldn't pay them any mind, let me ignore them until they seem happy or whatever, or calm? Do you think there's damage there? Can you explain that for those listening?
I think there could be. And I think an explanation that's maybe a little easier to grasp is that I think it could potentially make things worse for your dog in the future. But I think what it also does is you're missing an opportunity to potentially make things better for them in the future. So if we want to talk about damage, it's really hard to kind of quantify that and say like, hey, what's better and what's worse. But I think if you get caught in a distressing moment and you're able to access relief, I think you deal with that similar distressing moment in the future more easily, because you know through history that you can access relief. Whereas if you have a distressing experience and you just suffer with it with no access to relief, the next time it comes up, I think it triggers a bit of a sense of being trapped in that moment, because historically you've never known there was a way to get out of it. And if I'm that person with that dog and my dog is having one of these two experiences, I sure as hell want to make sure that they know that they can access at least some relief, rather than feeling trapped in every, thunderstorm or even, more like subtle things that some dogs just struggle with. Relief can often be like readily available, but we choose not to. And I think that can make the situations in the future worse for the dog, because every time it happens, it just reaffirms that they're trapped in it, reaffirms that they can't get out of it, and that they have no control over that. And that can lead to, what we call like learned helplessness, where they just shut down because they have, in their learned experience, learned that there's no way to get out of this situation.
Yeah. I think that's interesting. Yeah, I 100% agree. And I do think it does become kind of a confirmation bias. Like every time I feel like this, there's nobody, and I do like to kind of do an analogy with people again, because I think that helps people understand when you can kind of look inward and reflect on how we feel with stuff like that. And, I tell people we have therapists and friends and Netflix shows, and, you want to do a puzzle or play a video game, or, you want to access going outside, you decide to go. Like, we have tons of outlets and other things. We still need our dogs. Yeah. And dogs don't have any of that. So they literally only have you to help them out here. So if not us, then who? So I think that's spot on.
But I think this one's really tricky. I think when you really like dig into this, it's actually quite a complex matter, because you start talking about like, what is behavior versus emotions, and like, what are emotions anyway? And I think it's I find this myth really actually fascinating, because there's a few very easy things to say about it to debunk it, but I don't feel like those explanations are often satisfying, and I feel like people don't latch onto those explanations. They don't really scratch the itch, right? So I could tell you that that fear is not a behavior, and therefore ideas of punishment and and reinforcement, which only apply in technical terms to behaviors, just can't by definition apply to fear. Like it never has, it never will. They're
Period,
just incongruent things, you know.
Exactly.
But that doesn't seem to. I don't feel like I've had this conversation 1,000 times, and I don't think that really sells people on it. And I think it's because there's something else going on there. There's some truth to it, and I recently had a really interesting conversation with my friend Ran, and they have an account, Ran Talks Dogs. Ran Talks with Dogs. We'll get that link.
Yeah, sure.
And they are a behavior analyst, and I was like, I need some of your time. Like, let's like help me understand this. And they said something really interesting that was that if we consider emotions to be antecedents for the behaviors, and that if your dog is fearful and then they behave in a certain way, and then we do whatever it is to comfort them, and that gives them relief, we are reinforcing the fearful behaviors, but those behaviors are only relevant when fear is present.
Right. It's a middle point that we're reinforcing, not the original source of the fear.
Exactly. So we can't, so what we would do in terms of reinforcing fearful behaviors, the dog would be more likely to more like enthusiastic and quickly come to you for relief. The behaviors associated with relief, the relief-seeking behaviors are gonna come more quickly. And I felt like that distinction really like did something for me.
Yeah, it's doing something for me right now. I'm like, that makes sense, you know, because they might feel like, okay, I can go, like you were saying, they know they can access you and feel something a little better or some comfort. So they might rush to go do that. But I just do want to kind of go off of that is not a bad thing that's happening. I think it's that really your dog is aware they can come for help. Like, thank God for that, you know?
Yeah.
So I want my dogs. And every time you said that, I'm thinking of Freddie, who came to me very anxious, you know, and he still has, you know, he's not 100% cure. Anxiety is not a disease you're going to just get rid of at some point completely. But, you know, he's a lot better, but he definitely has some things. And I can tell he rushes over and he's like, Mom, you know, and I'm happy to be, you know, his mom. There's a little dog mom there to help him out. That's my job. I feel like that is part of our job as pet parents, is to help our dogs feel better.
And I think to what you said about it actually being a good thing, I think it was this distinction that I just described that got me going there. I was like, oh, wait a minute. Not only should we be comforting them when they need it, we should be like looking for those opportunities.
Right.
Because this is actually like, if we wanted to, let's say like down the road, if something terrible happens to my dog, something terrible, like something scary happens, we're on a hike. I'm never going to put him in a scary situation so that I can reinforce his recall to me.
Right.
But if every single time he's a bit distressed, he comes to me and I reinforce that behavior, in the future, hypothetically, if he has a scary experience, he's got a long history of coming to me when scary stuff happens to find relief. And like, man, imagine he just ran off because I was ignoring him every time there was a thunderstorm or you know, fireworks or something like that. So it's like an opportunity to train a really practical, useful, potentially life-saving behavior.
Yeah. I want to be their person. And in that moment, you're your dog's person. And I feel like, you know, that's the whole relationship. I feel like when we're talking about dogs and training in particular, I was just having this conversation with a colleague, and I said, you know, we were talking about how training's not really, we're not viewing training as training. We kind of view it as lifestyle, relationship building, communication, all of those lovely words we all use in kind of lieu of training. We are trainers and we do training, but we kind of view it as an underlying relationship thing. So I think this boils down to that. It's what kind of relationship do you want to have with your dog? And do you want them to come to you when they need advice and help? Or do you, you know, want them to kind of find something else or someone else or not have an option? And I don't think that's fair to do to them. So.
Absolutely.
So you're not going to reinforce your dog's fear, folks. It's okay. Reassure your dog. Please comfort them. They need the help. They're having a rough time and they need their guardian and somebody to let them know it's all good. Awesome. That was really good. Thank you for that, Don. I think that's going to be helpful for people because that is a big one.
So.
And man, even though it's 2021, I almost said 2020, but 2021, I forget what year it is anymore. But I feel like even though we've gotten all this research and data and there's more of us out there advocating for our dogs and all of this stuff, generally these myths, all the ones that we're going to talk about today and then some, they're still sticking around for dear life. So hopefully this content will help people view it a little differently.
Absolutely.
All right. So myth number 2, here we go. This is a big one. They're all big. I'm going to say this to every single one. Like, this is so important. I feel like I say that the whole time I'm recording these, but it is all important. All right. So this is the myth. You need to use all 4 quadrants of learning theory when working with dogs. Oh boy. Don and I are covering our faces right now for those just listening. So for those listening, I want to just break down really quickly what the 4 quadrants are, just in case they're not aware. So first of all, the 4 quadrants and what they are and what they mean, essentially it's positive punishment, positive reinforcement, negative punishment, negative reinforcement. What I want to keep in mind, or want you to keep in mind, is the word positive here, people, means adding something, and negative means taking something away. And reinforcement means basically the likelihood of increasing the frequency of that behavior, and punishment is the likelihood of reducing the frequency of that behavior generally. That's kind of the gist. So as Don and I use mainly as positive reinforcement, which is we add something the dog likes to hopefully have that behavior happen more and have it occur more. So with that, I'll be honest, I got to say, I don't know if you might agree with this, but I got to be honest. The only time I hear this argument, or if you will, or myth, is from people who on the internet who get upset that I'm advocating for positive only methods.
Yeah.
That's the only time I get those comments where it's like, well, you got to use all of them, and you got to use all the tools and all the things at your disposal in order to train the dog properly. And you have to have a whole approach to it, not just be closed-minded, quote unquote, of just using 1 or 2 quadrants and blah, blah, blah. Right. And obviously I know we don't agree with that sentiment, but what are your thoughts on that myth, and what do you think is where does that stem from for people?
Just listening to you kind of cover it in broad strokes is like making my skin crawl. I hate this one. It's so the first thing that I really don't like about it is that it's often kind of like a boast of like a defense,
Right.
and it's like we're talking about operant conditioning, so we're kind of like dropping science on this argument, and it's like I know what I'm talking about, but it's such a cherry picking of the science.
Yes.
Like you're saying, like, actually this is how behavior works. We can encourage it and discourage it in these sorts of ways, and we use all of the, we're not close-minded. We use all of the options available to us. But even like B.F. Skinner, who like basically like the godfather of like behaviorism and the guy who really pushed operant conditioning and explored it, he would have told you himself, there's tons of quotes out there, like he would have told you yourself, he's like, don't, like, it's such a waste opportunity to like explore punishment procedures without exploring reinforcement procedures, and the fallout was well documented from the very beginning. So when you defend some dog training sort of methods in this way, you're saying like, I'm doing it because of science, sort of, but you're completely ignoring everything else that we know about the quadrants.
It's one thought, and you're missing all the rest of it that followed that would basically debunk your point about this, like in the beginning.
Totally.
Right.
So that freaks me out. It's just the cherry picking. And I feel like there's a lot of that, you do this, a little bit of research, you like latch onto a couple like really fundamental ideas about behavior and behavior change and learning theory. And then you just kind of cherry pick the bits. It's confirmation bias. You cherry pick the bits that suit your sort of position, and you ignore all of the others, or you just stop researching because you got what you needed.
Exactly.
And so it's really just this very, partial understanding of operant conditioning, and so it kind of freaks me out in that way.
It freaks me out too, honestly, and I think you nailed it saying that it's this weird and I'm paraphrasing, but it's this weird, like, I'm going to use science on you. And we're like, we're professionals. Like, I've been doing this and we've been doing this a really long time. I'm aware. And I always kind of say, hey, just because they're listed doesn't mean that they should all be used. And more importantly, need to be all used. So I always say, hey, you can, you know, can I punch someone in the face to get them to comply with something I'd like? Sure. Should I? Probably not. You know, like it's ridiculous. And if you apply it to people, again, making it kind of in our world, you know, can I yell at somebody and use force on somebody and intimidate someone and act like a lunatic? Of course. And could that get behavior change? Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
But you know, it's not what is, could I do it in a non-invasive way and a non-aversive way, in a more pleasant way? Absolutely. So to me, I think it's just, again, being blunt, a lack of full knowledge, like you were saying, about the science. And then secondarily, I think that it's, again, kind of a lazy way of viewing it, in the weirdest way, of just because they're using those other things, they feel defensive about it. And I get it. And I think some people do feel kind of shamed when we might say, and I think, I forget who said this, but feeling ashamed and being shamed are two totally separate things. And just because we're stating facts does not mean we're, you know, shaming anyone. We're just simply trying to advocate and say, hey, this isn't needed.
Totally. Yeah. No, I think that's a great distinction too. But it's, I'm not like responsible for your feeling of feeling ashamed over like being faced with some facts, you know, like I have no control over that, you know? And I'm not trying to like tear you down. I'm just going to place this fact here and
plant a seed.
You know, I have no control over how you respond to it. And I think with that, like, I mean, a couple of things that you mentioned there, the open-mindedness, and also like sort of exactly the same as that one that I hear so often. If you are educated on the like use of these tools, the use of these methods, the proper use, et cetera, is all like, I was like, yo, I get how it works. Like, you know, this is like,
I think we got it.
I choose these methods because I've got like I've got a sense of the spectrum, and I'm like, this is best.
Exactly.
And I think it all just comes along with a really, like, a severe underappreciation for fallout and underappreciation for like the you know, the negative consequences that are really, really well documented with certain procedures. People think that, you know, they can, I mean, it seems to me that a lot of people out there think that, you know, we can use a certain form of punishment to decrease a behavior, and that's just the end of it, without really valuing like what the experience is on the other end. I've been thinking recently about a little, probably post this sometimes, but that like punishment serves the punisher at the expense of the punished.
That is so true. Damn.
You know, and it's reinforcing. When I can do a thing that stops an annoying thing, that's going to encourage my behavior that stops the thing, even if it sucked for that other, you know, whoever, that person, that dog, that whoever I'm sort of engaging with.
It's a vicious cycle at that point, because you're like, ooh, it worked. I'm going to try it again. And that's where behavior on that end, our behavior is getting reinforced perhaps. And that's going to increase the likelihood of us resorting to that. And you're absolutely right. And I do want to just quickly say this, I think you'll find this funny. You know, I wish this wasn't happening, but considering it's happening, we have to laugh about it. But I'm like, you know, I'll hear about the tools, like, you know, you just have to know how to use them. And I know we didn't include this myth officially today, but we're going to kind of include it because I think it's important. And you mentioned, I think this is important, where it's like, oh, you know, I use this tool and, you know, we'll advocate that it's not necessary and that there's fallout to using that stuff. And, you know, someone will say that, well, you have to use it correctly. You need to be educated on these tools. Like, we're some morons who are not educated, even though we do this for a living. But aside from that, I'll hear people say, well, my dog loves it. Like, when I bring out this tool, my dog's thrilled. And I'm like, wow, did they tell you that? And then also, you know, that's what I'm thinking. And then also it's like, I'm always thinking, well, what the hell is the dog supposed to do? Like, roll over and die? They don't, their option is to either go outside with it on or roll over and die. Like what, or bite you in the face. Like, what are they supposed to do? Of course, they're just going to stand there and be happy that they're going outside perhaps, but that doesn't mean that they'd prefer if we could all become like superheroes and get some magic powers or, you know, Harry Potter wizardry or something and start actually talking to a dog. And I said, hey, would you prefer this like metal around your neck or would you like this nice soft harness around your body? I'm almost positive that no one's going to say, I really want that metal there. You know, it's just, they don't have options. So of course they're going to just eat it and go out. So I think people have a misconception about like, tolerance is not enjoyment. And we also don't know that dogs are quote unquote thrilled about certain tools. I think they just love, they love their person. I'm sure they love their people and they're living there and they're going out. But, you know, I think we kind of project that confirmation bias about like, well, we're using it. So my dog loves it and I love it. And, you know, I think they still prefer to have something else that's less hurtful if possible. If we could ask dogs, I'm sure that would be their response. Yeah,
absolutely. That does make me think of another bit of here where we're really focusing, hey, all four quadrants, with that like underappreciation of what fallout is also a real underappreciation for classical conditioning, you know, for like just stimulus response, you know, and this is often associated, you know, the famous example with Pavlov, ringing a bell and the dogs associate the bell with food. So they hear the bell, there's no food present, but they start to salivate. You know, this is the classic example. And I think, you know, you pull your prong collar off of the hook and that jingle sound, like everything that precipitates from there is like the next number of steps that lead to going for a walk. And that's an exciting event.
Right.
I think a dog could love the sound and the sight of the prong collar and like, and hate the feeling of it outside and still be excited about seeing it. I just don't think they make that connection sometimes. And that's an extreme example. You know, I think a dog could also just get moderately excited about the sight of it and might live a life with a prong collar that's like not exceptionally aversive. But I think even in an extreme example, you could have a dog who's like, oh, I hate this feeling. And I still love the sight of the thing they're just not putting it together.
Right.
Two different situations.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's like I was saying, they don't have a real choice. So they're going to wind up going out because we're going out and, you know, what else are they supposed to do? You know, so I just think that brought that up for me. And I always just kind of have to like chuckle to myself about that because, you know, and I don't expect everybody to know this stuff, which is why we're putting this content out. But I do think, you know, people that really are kind of angry or upset about not using all the quadrants, like we're talking about on this myth, it's just not, it's just, I think those of us who know a deeper understanding of the conditioning and the associations with this stuff, we understand that it's at the end of the day, not necessary to utilize them. So just because they're listed does not mean that they all need to be utilized. They're just there for educational purposes only, in my opinion. I don't think we ever really need to use it. So, and again, I think advocating for positive only methods is sometimes a daunting task, but I do think that collectively as professionals, I think it's important that we talk about this stuff and help people understand there is a better way. Some people might not know that. So I think that's important.
Totally.
So, which brings me, this is an interesting one. I'm excited about this last one here. So we kind of had a 2A. We snuck in an extra myth, which I'm really happy about, that. But the third myth here is dogs are nothing like kids. So I'm going to let you expand on this a little bit, but I know, and I wanted to bring this point up because I know I'm guilty of this. So I have a confession to make. I've equally told folks, hey, don't don't think of your dog like a human. Like, you know, they're not as smart as us in terms of like, you know, I always say they're not like a 70-year-old wise human brain and that little fluffy dog down there or whatever. And, you know, they don't understand English or all the times we're shouting something in the backyard at them to come that they might not understand what the hell we're saying. And so, you know, we kind of have that. But then equally, as I've done in this podcast already, I'm like, well, there's similarities to people. Like if we're upset, we need some help and they need some help. So I've definitely pulled from opposite directions on this. So I think this is an interesting one. Explain your thoughts, Don, on some of the similarities with this. And in particular, I think it's important, like we were talking about, on honing in on the impact of punishment, like punishment with kids, punishment with dogs. We do kind of associate those and use that as an analogy or kind of a reference point. So give me your thoughts on that generally. Let's expand on that a bit.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess that like in a nutshell, it's dogs aren't kids, kids aren't dogs. And in that, and I agree, totally go both ways, because I think we can do our dogs a disservice by projecting on them, you know, by anthropomorphizing. But I also think anthropomorphism is a really complex issue. And I think we've also done a lot of animals disservice over a long time for the intense scrutiny about anthropomorphizing. So we've been really, scientists for ages have been discouraged about considering like the emotional lives of animals, because that would be anthropomorphic. And so it is a bit of a double-edged sword. You know, I think we can, there can be a disservice on both sides. What I do like about the comparison, about saying that like dogs and kids are similar, I would also argue that the ways that I would argue that I could replace dogs with any sort of animal, but like what I'm looking at is like the similarities. And when we talk about, you know, sort of back to our quadrants of operant conditioning, those apply universally across all species. So we know that we can, they all have behavior, they can all be modified in all sorts of ways, and that the fallout that we understand is happens in all of those species as well, though that's probably a reach. I'm sure that we need to like study every different species to say that kind of conclusively.
But generally, you know,
I think it would
behavior's behavior at some level. Just
for sure. And I think on this, there's a you know, there's an argument to say like, oh, we can't prove that, so we should err on the side of caution. But I think there's a flip argument that is to say it would be really unusual if we did study it and found that it wasn't the same. Like, you know, like our brains, totally. Like our brains are similar in so many ways that it would be like an anomaly if we started studying, you know, dogs' brains and you were like, oh, wow, that part of the brain functions totally different than the similar part of our brain. That would be weird, right?
Right. That would be shocking news for everybody, I think.
Yeah, exactly. All the scientists everywhere would be scratching their heads being like, oh,
we
this is so
up.
significantly different. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So for me, like one thing that comes up is thinking about the emotional lives, thinking about like nervous systems, where there are so a lot of similarities, even though it's definitely with like nervous systems, a lot of similarities. Emotions are really hard to like put your finger on, even hard science with humans. You know, it's still very much, psychology is a soft science in a lot of ways because we can't objectively measure emotions.
That's true.
A lot of and I'm not a neurologist at all, but I know that a lot of the parts of our brain, there's a number of parts of our brain that we call the limbic system, and that is really central to like our experience of emotions. And that part of our brain has been there for a very long time, and the same sort of the limbic system is present in so many species. Definitely dogs, all like mammals. It's the same in reptiles. It's the same in fish. And we know, I mean, I was guilty of this. I was told, you know, as a kid going fishing, the fish they just don't feel pain. And they definitely do. The limbic system, like responsible for all of our feelings, good and bad, has been around for like 150 million years.
Right.
So while we can't necessarily prove things in a really definitive way, it's reasonable, I think, and probably less reasonable to say it couldn't be, even though we can't prove it definitively.
I agree.
I feel like I just went on a little tangent on the kid dog thing.
No, I like it. This is good. Limbic systems.
What I like to get at there, it exposes a double standard. We know that with kids, there's tons of things that would be just wildly inappropriate. And not even for like if I had a kid, you know, and him like, hey, cut that out, you know, like that's like one thing. But if I'm a paid professional childcare worker, I'd get fired. I'd be reprimanded. I might be fired. I might lose
Yep.
my license because I'd work in a regulated industry. I could be charged criminally. Like, and this is like back to those quadrants. Like if you're working with kids, if you're like, if things qualify in a particular way, and I would say probably just about anything that qualifies as positive punishment, like that can have really, really, really serious repercussions. And I think people grasp that. They're like, yes, of course, that makes sense. And then I say, but it's the same with dogs. And it's like, boom, no, it's not. Kids are nothing like dogs. Don't even go there. That's crazy. And I'm like, they're not that different in a lot of ways.
100%. I feel like raising the roof physically right now, because I'm like, yes, no, because it's true. You just nailed it. You know, like if you were a professional child psychologist or a child therapist going to work with a kid who has some issues or is trying to overcome something, just like we do as trainers and behavior consultants going in to work with dogs that have anxiety issues. And even if you're just training a dog on new behaviors and having a good time about it all, regardless, those professionals would be in some big trouble if that happens, if they were using that form of any form of punishment like that, an aversive type of approach is definitely not going to get you into any good place with that family who's hiring you to come in. But with dogs, it's lost. I feel like that sentiment is lost when you use that. And I'm not sure why. I think back to what you said earlier, I think it's a cherry picking thing that doesn't serve that argument really well, because then that would cause people to go, oh, I shouldn't be doing all the stuff that I'm doing. Right. So instead, I'm just going to say, well, they're not kids, and of course they're not kids, but like you were just referring to, there's a lot of similarities in terms of emotions, associations, the impacts of feeling negative about certain things and so on. So again, just because we can doesn't mean we should. And I think, it can really affect the learner if we are not purposefully trying to make it a generally positive, a good experience for them. There's going to be ramifications to that if we don't on the dog, maybe not on the quote unquote professional, because we are in an unregulated industry. And I do want to say that out loud again to hone in on that point that you were kind of making that analogy to the child psychologist. There is regulation there. There's ethics and standards and rules you have to follow. And unlike many professions, whether it's your accountant or your therapist or your doctor or a lawyer, a teacher, anybody, they all have a code of conduct, and dog trainers do not. It's whatever that person feels like saying or doing, unfortunately. And that's why it's important to research your trainers and make sure that they're being transparent about how they go about their approach to training and working with you and your family and your dog.
Absolutely. It's wild. My brother's a teacher. His wife, my sister-in-law, is a teacher. My good friend and roommate is a speech language pathologist. She works with kids all the time. The amount of regulation there, I know is sometimes they know it's legit, but they're like, man, there's a lot of regulation. We need to be really careful with our kids. We need to be careful about the words we use. We need to be careful about how we engage. We need all of these things, and it's because it's regulated, and it's regulated to protect the kids. Right. And there's so many, and this goes beyond like just working with kids, but I think especially with kids, there are a lot of people out there. There's a lot of professions that work with children, and none of this stuff that flies in the dog training world would be, you'd lose your job and you might be charged criminally. You know, like it's really bad if you flip it. And I think that's also the resistance there when you say like, hey, this wouldn't fly with kids. Why does it fly with dogs? Because the contrast is stark. There's an enormous gap in the standards of care.
It's as easy
from no care, no standard to like a lot of standards.
Yeah, it's like you said, standards. It's a thing, and I mean, I love what I do, and I love our profession, but it's as easy as starting up a popsicle stand if you wanted to. I mean, it's literally the same equivalent of standards to get going, and it's scary. And if I was just a pet parent and not a trainer, and I was looking for help, I'd have no idea. If I wasn't in this community and know what I know, which is why it's, one of my missions is to put this out there. So hopefully somebody, hears it, might rethink their approach or who they're hiring to come out or how they're going to go about it with their dog. And so this information is so important, and there is a stark difference in our profession. And I think it's important to bring that comparison up, because dogs and young kids, there are some similarities there that we can pull from to have a better appreciation of how we're going to approach communicating with them and helping them. Our dogs need our help. And it's just like our kids need our help. We need to approach it with compassion and empathy.
Absolutely.
So awesome. I think that's such an important point. And, we did a lot of debunking. This was good. I feel like we need some positive reinforcement after this. Me too. I feel like I'm going to go for a run now.
Let's double down. Let's take, I got 10 more now.
Another round. Well, Don, hey, maybe we'll do a part 2 of this, because I know we can go on and on with these myths. And these were some really good ones. And I'm glad we can spread awareness about this and again, help give people some knowledge about these misconceptions that are out there. And I hope that it brought all of them some value. Those listening, hope it brings you value. And real quick before we sign off here, Don, let those listening know where they can connect with you. And I hear you have a new project you're working on that is going to be launching soon. I'm really excited to hear more about it. So let us know, where can we connect with you, and what's going on with you and this awesome project you have in the works?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much for the opportunity. So first, just general, my training business, most active on Instagram. That's at Running Dogs TO, being from Toronto. And, I'm pretty active there. You can find me under the same handle on Facebook, but I feel like for me, Instagram's sort of where it's at. And if you want to kind of snoop on what I'm up to, that's the place to do that. But this most recent project is something that I'm really, really excited about. For a while now, I've been sort of throwing this little slogan around and using this hashtag that says "Give your dog a raise."
Yes, I've used it.
Ethos behind it, amazing.
Love that.
The ethos behind it sort of started from saying like, hey, let's just try to offer, like, let's not be shy, let's not be like stingy about reinforcement. Let's try to think like, hey, all of the amazing things they do for us, let's make it worth their while. Let's like pay them well with those treats, But I think it's really blown up into like a much bigger sort of philosophy about just generally being generous with your dog. And that can be with reinforcement, but reinforcement can be those tasty treats. It can be your time and some games. It can be like some great toys. It can be opportunities like going on a really great hike a little bit more often, or whatever it is. So trying to just encourage people to embrace the idea of being generous with reinforcement and all of the ways that it comes, and hopefully to kind of combat some feelings that I think a lot of us I've had about being like, oh, I shouldn't pay 5 treats for that behavior. It should be 1, and trying to kind of counteract some of the, I'm going to say, stinginess. I felt like I was stingy for a while until I fully started really embracing this. Yeah. So give your dog a raise. That's the kind of the ethos behind it. But building on that, what we've done is we've got a really great design, and we've put it on some hoodies, and I'm sporting one right now.
It looks so cool. I love it. Give your dog a raise. Amazing. So cute.
And I asked a really great designer friend if he had something on the side that he might be able to whip up for me. I didn't ask for the bulldog. He came back with his bulldog logo. I was like, that is amazing. And instantly I knew that I had to be working with my friend Jeremy, who runs Benevolent Bully Rescue, and that's at Benevolent Bully Rescue on all of the platforms, I think. Yeah. The focus is just on bully breeds, but runs like a really top-notch ethical rescue where they just really value care and behavior, good information. They take care of their people. They support their people like through the whole, like they're checking all of the boxes. So we've got these hoodies. I've got a store. They are available. They will be available on Monday. You've got a link.
Yay.
That store will be live on Monday.
Guys, I'm going to put a link in the show notes for you. So
amazing. And we've got a big order on the way, and I'm excited to be packaging them up and mailing them out and whatever. 30% of all of the revenue is going to Benevolent Bully Rescue. Amazing. So we're hoping to raise funds for rescues, and we're hoping to just raise awareness about really great force-free training, ethical care for dogs.
Oh my gosh. That was perfect. I'm so excited for you, Don. That's amazing. It's so cool.
I'm very excited too.
that you're doing that. And I am definitely picking me up one of those. Time to give myself an early birthday present. So I'll be going on Monday when it goes live and snatching one up for myself. So that is wonderful. Thank you for doing that. You know, we need more of that. And that's great that, that the rescue is also, you know, going down that path of advocating and talking about care and ethics and all that stuff you mentioned. Is really nice to see. So I'm so happy for you. We'll definitely put a link to the show notes and be talking about that. I cannot wait to get mine because it looks so cool. I feel FOMO right now that I don't have one. So I'm gonna have to get one ASAP, and I'm really happy for you. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. And I'll just add, because I imagine, you know, we're recording today, but you'll like do a little edit and go up. So that'll be the 18th is when this, so it may be live by the time you hear this, I don't know, but the 18th is when the store will be live.
Good call on that. Very nice. Yeah. So on the 18th, guys, January 18th, that will be live. So whenever you're listening to this, that should be up at that point. And, you know, Don, it was so great speaking with you. I love all your insight and your knowledge. Thank you so much for coming on, my friend. It's a pleasure. You are an inspiration. I'm so pleased to be on your podcast. This is just making me so happy. Oh, thank you so much. That was hey, you just gave me a raise. Thank you. Yeah. Positive reinforcement there. That's great. I'm so glad we can chat. And until next time, everyone, treat yourself and treat your dog.